The sun burned across the sky like a molten coin, and the woman moved through the tall grass with steps that grew slower and heavier with every mile. Her boots sank into the soft dust, her throat felt dry, and her vision wavered at the edges. She had been walking since dawn, following faint tracks that crisscrossed the savannah, each print shallow and half erased by wind and time. She had memorized them by now, the small rounded pads, the light claws, the pattern that told her they were still alive somewhere ahead. The cubs were moving together, staying low, staying careful. Her breath came in uneven waves, her shirt clung to her back with sweat, the heat seemed endless. She thought of the day she found them, 3 small bundles of fur curled in the hollow of an old log, their ribs showing, their eyes glassy with hunger. She had fed them with trembling hands. Milk from a bottle warmed over the camp stove. She had watched them grow, learn to play, learn to snarl, learn to live, and when they were strong enough, they had slipped away into the grass the way all wild things must, and she had told herself that was right, that she had done her part, that her duty was to let them be free. Yet now she was back chasing shadows across the plains, because she could not forget the way the smallest cub had looked at her before leaving, wide-eyed and unsure, as though torn between two worlds. The air was thick with the smell of dust and dried leaves. The wind whispered low across the grass, carrying the sound of faraway birds. She paused at a patch of dry earth where the tracks reappeared and knelt, her knees cracking, her fingers brushed the faint outline of a paw print. Her heart lifted just a little. They were still close. She whispered without sound that she was coming, that she would see them one last time, even if the world did not want her. Toby midday, the horizon shimmered with heat, the sky blinding white. She felt her legs shaking from hunger. Her canteen almost empty. She found a thorn tree alone in the open plain, its trunk bent and scarred by storms, its shade thin but enough. She lowered herself onto the ground, her muscles groaning. She leaned back against the rough bark and closed her eyes. Just for a moment, the world buzzed softly around her. She could hear the rustle of insects, the faint hum of wind, the heartbeat in her own chest slowing to match the rhythm of the plains. When she thought of water, of the cubs of soft fur beneath her fingers, she told herself she would rest for a breath, then rise again. But the weight of exhaustion settled heavy over her shoulders, her head tilted forward. The sounds of the savannah began to fade into one another, the world melting into a blur of warmth and memory. The image of 3 golden cubs running through tall grass, the flash of sunlight on fur, the sound of their laughter, if laughter could exist in creatures so wild. Her body went still, her mind slipped into dreams where the line between human and beast dissolved, and the only thing that mattered was the steady pulse of life beneath an endless sky. And so she slept, sitting upright, her face soft, her hands folded loosely across her lap, the wind brushing her hair like a quiet hand, as the world watched and waited for what would come next. The savannah stretched silent under the early night sky, and the air shimmered faintly with leftover heat from the day. 3 small shapes moved through the tall grass, careful and quiet, their bodies low, their eyes wide and glinting gold beneath the fading light. They were young but no longer helpless, their muscles lean, their steps cautious, their instincts sharpening each day. They had learned the ways of the wind, the whispers of danger, the sound of hunger in their bellies. The woman's scent lingered on the wind, a faint trail of memory carried across the plains. The largest cub moved first, its ears flicking forward, its nose twitching. It remembered the smell of smoke and warmth, the taste of milk. It remembered soft hands and the gentle hum of a voice that was not like the sounds of the wild, a voice that had comforted instead of commended. It paused, staring ahead at the shape beneath the thorn tree, the shape that had once fed it and soothed its cries. The night breeze shifted and the scent became stronger. It felt curiosity stirring, a pull that no instinct could explain behind it. The second cub pressed close, its breath fast, its eyes darting to the shadows that crept between the grass. It wanted to follow, but fear sat deep in its bones, fear taught by nights of thunder and the memory of losing their mother. It remembered her scent fading from their fur, replaced by the smell of the stranger, the woman who had brought them back from the edge of death, the one who had sat by the fire whispering strange sounds that made the night feel less empty. The smallest cub lingered behind the others, its tiny paws trembling as it stepped forward. It had always been the one to wait, the one that watched before moving, the one that felt the world before it acted. Its ears caught the rhythm of her breathing, steady and soft, its heart slowed to match. It was the same rhythm it had fallen asleep too many times when it was small, curled against her leg. Under the pale glow of the stars, the grass swayed around them, whispering secrets between each stalk, the air thick with the scent of dust and earth and the faint sweetness of the woman's skin. The cubs crept closer, their movements slow and deliberate, their eyes fixed on the still figure at the base of the tree. They had seen her move and speak and smile, but never like this, never so silent, so still, so vulnerable. They did not understand sleep. They only knew stillness that came before danger. Yet there was no threat in the air, only calm. The oldest cub took one more step, its paw pressing softly into the dry ground, its body tense, its breath shallow. The wind shifted again, carrying her scent closer, and the cub froze, its ears twitching, its tail flicking. Once it glanced back at the others, its gaze steady. A silent signal that this was safe, that this was home. Then it lowered itself onto its belly and crept the last few feet until the outline of her boot filled its sight. The cub stared for a long time, its eyes flicking up to her hand resting against her knee, unmoving. The night wrapped around them thick and heavy, the sound of distant crickets blending with the whisper of her breath. The cub blinked slowly, its body relaxing, as though the air itself had whispered that this was not the time for fear. It pressed its paws softly into the earth beside her foot and waited as the stars began to bloom overhead and the world held its breath for what might happen next. The night deepened into a quiet blue, the kind of silence that stretched wide across the plains where only wind and breath and heartbeat could be heard. The cubs crouched low, their eyes glinting faintly as the moon began to climb. The largest of them shifted its weight forward, its muscles rippling beneath its fur. It felt something strange pulling it toward the still figure beneath the tree, something that lived between memory and instinct. It had known fear before and hunger and cold, but this feeling was softer, steadier, like the low hum of the earth after rain. The woman did not stir, her head tilted slightly, her breath rising and falling in slow, even rhythm. Her face pale in the moonlight, her hands relaxed, her shoulders slumped. With exhaustion, the cub could smell the faint traces of her skin, the warmth that lingered even through the dust. It stepped forward, the grass brushing its flanks, each step careful, soundless, its nose twitching as it drew closer. The smell was familiar, like the first scent it had known when its eyes were still closed, the scent that meant safety behind it. The smaller cubs waited, watching with bright eyes, their tails flicking in the shadows. The second cub made a low sound, a half growl, half whimper. The wind carried it away, and the woman did not wake. The first cub kept moving closer, now close enough to see the faint line of her lips, the flutter of her lashes. It tilted its head, unsure what to make of this strange stillness. She was alive yet, unmoving. It stretched its neck forward and sniffed the air between them. The world held still, no sound but the low sigh of wind through grass. The cub took one last step, its paw landing softly on the edge of her coat. It froze, waiting for her to react. She did not. The rise and fall of her chest continued steady, the smell of her breath mixing with the dust of the night. The cub felt a strange calm wash over it, as though something deep inside recognized her beyond words, beyond reason. Smallest cub crept forward, now emboldened by the stillness. It brushed against its sibling and peered up at the woman, its ears twitching. It let out a soft chirp, a sound of questioned curiosity. Its tiny claws dug into the dirt as it leaned forward and pressed its nose against the edge of her boot, the leather cool and smooth against its muzzle. It pulled back, then tried again, pressing a little harder. This time her legs shifted slightly, but her eyes remained closed, her face soft, her breathing. Even the cubs froze. The world seemed to stop, the air thick with anticipation. Then the woman sighed, not in fear, not in pain, but in the kind of deep dream sigh that comes from a place of safety. Her head tilted to the side and a strand of hair fell across her face. The largest cub watched and then relaxed, its muscles loosening, its tail lowering. It took another step forward and lowered its body until it lay half in shadow, half in moonlight, its gaze fixed on her face. The savannah was silent. Around them the stars, bright and cold above a moment, balanced perfectly between worlds, between predator and protector, between instinct and trust. And as the cubs lay in the tall grass, the woman sleeping, unaware of the eyes upon her, the night itself seemed to bend softly around them like a breath held in awe. The air was still beneath the thorn tree, the world hushed in a kind of fragile balance, as if the night itself were afraid to break. The cubs lay closed, their bodies half hidden in the tall grass, their eyes fixed on the woman who slept with her head bowed, her breath slow and steady. The oldest cub watched her, and in the rhythm of her breathing it felt something stirred deep in its memory. It remembered another night when thunder cracked open the sky and rain fell hard and cold. It remembered being small and shaking with fear. It had been her arms that lifted it from the mud, her hands that wrapped it in warmth, her voice that had cut through the roar of the storm, soft, steady, promising that it was safe now, That same voice existed only in the memory of sound, yet the calm it carried still lived in the cub's bones. It took a slow step forward, its paws sinking slightly into the soft dirt, its whiskers brushing against the edge of her coat. She did not move. The cub hesitated, then leaned closer until it could smell her hair, the faint scent of smoke and soil and wind. It remembered that smell from nights beside the fire when she would hum without words. As the cubs slept curled against her knees, the scent meant peace, it meant home, even if it had never known what home truly was. The second cub shifted behind it, its breath quick, its eyes darting from the woman to the shadows around them. Every instinct warned it that to come this close to something so large and still was dangerous, yet the stillness of her body told a different story. The wind carried no fear, only warmth. The cub lowered its head and took a step forward, then another. The sound of its movement swallowed by the quiet. It reached her side and pressed its nose gently against the ground beside her hand. The warmth from her skin seeped into its fur and it let out a low sound, barely a hum. The smallest cub stayed back for a moment, its small heart racing faster than the others. It had always been the last to move, always afraid to trust the world, but something about the woman's stillness drew it closer. It crept through the grass, its paws trembling, its tail flicking nervously, until it reached the others and peered up at her face framed by strands of hair in moonlight. It watched her lashes flutter as if she were dreaming. It wondered if she dreamed of them. The night pressed close, the sound of crickets faded, and even the wind seemed to pause. The cubs moved together now, slowly forming a half circle around the woman. They did not understand why they were here, only that the world felt softer near her, quieter. The tension in their muscles eased, replaced by something new, something tender. The largest cub turned its head slightly, brushing its cheek against her boot. It was not hunger that guided them now, but memory, the echo of care that had once saved their lives. The woman shifted in her sleep, a faint murmur escaping her lips, a sound so soft it trembled through the still air. The cubs froze, watching, waiting, but the sound carried no danger. It was familiar, like rain against leaves, like the first breath after fear. They relaxed again, and the oldest lowered its head, resting its chin lightly on the ground beside her leg, its eyes half closing, the memory of trust complete, not as something learned but as something remembered from a time before wood's end. Above them the moon hung low, casting its light across the grass, and the woman and the cubs together. Oh, quiet scene of two worlds meeting without threat or question, only the simple silent truth of belonging. The night had deepened into a quiet ocean of darkness and silver light. The moon hung above like a patient eye, watching over the shapes that breathed beneath the thorn tree. The woman slept unmoving, her head tilted slightly, her hand resting open beside her. The cubs lay around her, their bodies small and silent, shadows pressed against the earth. The air was heavy with the scent of soil and wild grass, and the faint sweetness of her skin carried softly on the wind. The oldest cub lifted its head, its ears twitching. It listened for danger, but heard only the sound of her breathing, calm, and even a steady rhythm that filled the air like the pulse of something ancient. It felt drawn to it the way the tide is drawn to the shore. It shifted closer, the fur of its belly brushing against the edge of her boot. It hesitated, its nose inches from her sleeve, the scent stronger, now more familiar, more human, yet comforting. The cub took a slow breath and pressed its nose lightly against the fabric. The texture was strange, rough and smooth at once, but beneath it was warmth, the kind of warmth that meant life. The cub pulled back for a moment, its whiskers trembling, then it leaned in again, its small heart thudding. It pressed a little harder, this time a soft sound slipping from its throat, something between a purr and a sigh. The woman stirred, her hand twitching slightly, her fingers brushing the air. The cub froze, its muscles tight, its eyes wide, but she did not wake. She only exhaled a long breath that carried the quiet of dreams behind the first cub. The others lifted their heads, watching, alert. The second one gave a soft chuff, a questioning sound. The smallest tilted its head, its eyes round and bright, the air between them thick with curiosity. The first cub turned slightly, glancing back as if to say it was safe, that the danger had passed and the world had not broken. The smallest cub took a hesitant step forward, then another, its paws making no sound on the dry earth, lowered its nose toward the woman's hand and sniffed the air that surrounded it. Their scent was everywhere, in the folds of her clothes, in the warmth that lingered around her, in the stillness that held the night. Together the smallest cub inched closer until its nose touched her fingertips. It felt the faintest movement, the slow shift of her pulse beneath her skin. It blinked once, then pressed its nose again, more firmly this time, and made a sound so soft the world barely heard it, a sound of recognition, the sound of something wild, remembering gentleness. The woman's lips moved faintly, her voice a whisper lost to sleep. The sound sent a shiver through the cubs. Not fear, but something deeper, something that made them still. They did not understand the meaning of the sound, but they felt its truth. It was the same tone she had used when she first called them, when she had promised safety without words. The smallest cub pressed its head against her hand, the first one lowered its chin beside her leg, and the second curled half around her boot, until their bodies formed a ring of warmth and silence. The savannah stretched wide and endless around them, yet in that moment it felt small, contained within the space beneath a thorn tree. The line between wild and human blurred, until it was no longer there. There was only breath and heartbeat, and the faint touch of trust passing like a spark through the cool night air. And in that stillness the wild watched and said, "Nothing." Night stretched long and quiet across the savannah, the sky scattered with stars that pulsed like slow heartbeats. The air carried a gentle chill, and the grass swayed softly, whispering secrets that only the earth could understand. The woman slept, still, her back against the tree, her face calm and shadowed in silver light. The cubs lay near her, the oldest with its chin resting beside her leg, the smallest curled against her hand, the second hovering uncertain, its eyes flicking between the woman and the darkness beyond. The second cub shifted its paws, pressing into the soil, its fur rippling as it breathed. It wanted to draw closer, but instinct told it to stay alert. It listened for the sounds that always filled the wild, the distant call of nightbirds, the soft rustle of unseen things moving through the grass, but none of those sounds felt threatening tonight. There was a stillness here, different from the fear that ruled their early days. It was a stillness that spoke of safety. Oldest cub lifted its head, its ears flicking back. It made a low sound, a rumble that vibrated faintly through the air. Not a warning, not a challenge, but a call. And the second cub responded with a soft whine. It stepped slow as it approached the woman. It lowered itself to the ground beside her other leg, its body half touching the hem of her coat. The warmth from her skin spread like invisible fire, and the cub felt its breath steady. It glanced once at the oldest and then at the woman, its heart slowing in rhythm with hers. The smallest cub shifted in its sleep, a faint sound slipping from its throat. It pressed its head more firmly against her hand, and one of her fingers moved. The cub went still, its tiny ears twitching, but the touch that followed was not sharp or sudden. It was soft, the unconscious movement of a dream, a hand brushing lightly over fur that felt like the memory of comfort. The cub made a sound, so small it was almost nothing, a hum that carried through the space around them and reached the other two. The cubs moved closer, drawn by that sound, until their bodies brushed one another, their breaths mingling in the cool air. The scent of the woman wrapped around them, familiar and calm, her warmth mixing with theirs, until there was no way to tell where one ended and another began. The night seemed to bend around them, softening its edges, the sounds of the world growing distant, replaced by the rhythm of sleep and heartbeat. The oldest cub lifted its head once more, looking out at the plains, its eyes bright beneath the stars. There was danger out there always, but for now, the danger was far, and the woman was here. The cubs did not understand why she made the world quieter, why the fear that lived inside them grew smaller in her presence, but they knew it was real, and that was enough. The oldest lay its head down again, closing its eyes, its tail curling close to its body. The woman shifted slightly, her breath deepening, her shoulders relaxing as if her body too recognized the safety that surrounded her. The cubs nestled closer, their warmth steady, their trust unspoken. The night wrapped them in silence, and above them the stars watched without blinking, holding their tiny world in a fragile kind of grace, a moment suspended between waking and dream, between wildness and peace, between what once was and what might still be. The night had softened into a calm that felt almost sacred, the kind of stillness that carried both warmth and wonder. The air hung cool and sweet around the thorn tree, the stars burning slow above as if afraid to move. The woman slept without stirring, her head tilted slightly to the side, her body heavy with exhaustion, her dreams quiet and deep. The cubs surrounded her in a loose circle, their bodies curled against her legs and arms, their breathing soft, their tails flicking lazily against the dry ground. The oldest lay closest, its eyes half open, watching the darkness beyond the grass, but even it seemed to sense there was nothing to fear. The smallest cub lifted its head, blinking sleep from its eyes, its ears twitching at the faint rustle of wind. It looked at the woman, its gaze lingering on the curve of her shoulder, on the slow rise and fall of her chest. It did not know what pulled it closer, only that something in the rhythm of her breathing felt like home. It rose onto its small, unsteady paws, its body trembling slightly as it climbed the few inches to reach her lap, then higher, pressing its claws gently into the fabric of her sleeve. The Woman murmured faintly in her sleep, a sound so soft it barely broke the air, but she did not wake. Her head tilted further forward and the cub froze for a heartbeat, then pressed on, climbing until it reached her shoulder. It was small enough that it fit neatly against the slope of her neck, its fur brushing lightly against her skin, its heartbeat quick but steady. It paused there, the world around them holding its breath, the only sound the faint rustle of leaves and the soft hum of life beneath the stars. The cub leaned forward and rested its head gently against her shoulder, the warmth of her skin seeping through the thin fabric of her shirt. It let out a long, slow sigh, the kind that only came when fear had finally let go. Its body relaxed completely, its eyes closing, its breathing matching hers until the two rhythms became one. The smallest cub had not known what it meant to be safe until this moment. Not when it was fed, not when it was sheltered, but now here, pressed against the steady warmth of something that asked for nothing in return. The oldest cub lifted its head, watching the small one with slow, blinking eyes. It made a low sound deep in its throat, not quite a growl, not quite a purr sound of recognition, perhaps even pride. The second cub stirred its tail, brushing against the woman's boot. It watched the smallest settle and then lowered its head again, its breath steady, its body melting into rest around her, the air between them thick with unspoken connection. The woman shifted slightly, her shoulder lowering as her head leaned toward the cub. For a moment her cheek brushed against soft fur, and though she slept, her lips curved faintly upward into the ghost of a smile, her dreams filled with the feeling of warmth pressed against her heart. She did not know she was being watched, or trusted, or chosen, but her body understood what her mind could not, and so she slept deep. The night stretched on, wrapped in silence and silver light, and the small weight on her shoulders stayed still, its fur rising and falling with each of her breaths, and somewhere, far above them, a single shooting star crossed the wide dark sky unnoticed, as if even the heavens did not wish to disturb the peace that had finally settled beneath the thorn tree. The first light of dawn crept across the plains, slow and soft like a breath, the sky pale blue and gold, the grass catching the glow as if it too had been waiting. The air was cool and full of the smell of earth and dew, the kind of air that carried the promise of another day. The woman still slept, her head tilted to one side, her shoulder heavy with the warmth of the smallest cub that lay against her, its fur rising and falling in rhythm with her slow, steady breathing. The other two cubs had shifted during the night, their bodies pressed close on either side of her, forming a small circle of warmth that shimmered faintly in the growing light. The sun touched the edge of the horizon, and the light brushed across the cubs, their fur catching it in ripples of gold. The oldest blinked awake, its eyes reflecting the sunrise. It lifted its head and sniffed the air, its breath misting in the cool morning. It could smell dust and grass and something faintly sweet, the scent of the woman still strong in the air. It looked at her, then at the smallest still resting against her shoulder, and something stirred inside it, not hunger, not fear, but a feeling it could not name, something quiet and heavy and alive. The smallest cub moved, its paws twitching as it began to wake. It lifted its head from her shoulder, blinking slowly as if torn between sleep and waking. It looked at her face and made a soft sound, almost questioning. The woman did not open her eyes, but her lips moved faintly as if answering. She turned her head just enough that her cheek brushed the cub's fur again, and though she was not awake fully, her voice came low and cracked with sleep. A murmur carried on the soft air, a word that meant nothing to the cub yet felt like a promise. The oldest cub rose and stretched its back, arching, its muscles rippling beneath golden fur. It looked out over the plains, the wind stirring through the grass. It felt the pull of the wild, the instinct to move, to hunt, to live as it was meant to. But when it turned back, its gaze lingered on the woman and its siblings, and for the first time it hesitated. It lowered itself again beside her tail, curling around its paws as if the world beyond could wait a little longer. Woman began to stir her fingers, twitching, her breath deepening, her eyes fluttering open to the light. The first thing she saw was gold fur pressed against her shoulder and wide, dark eyes watching her. She did not move, not at first, afraid to break the fragile stillness. Her heart hammered softly in her chest, and she exhaled slow and steady, her voice barely a whisper. "Hello, little one," she said, the sound tender and raw. The cub blinked, its head tilting, then it made that soft hum again and leaned its weight back into her shoulder as if answering. The other two cubs lifted their heads, ears twitching, tails flicking in the morning breeze. They watched her with curiosity and caution, but no fear. The smallest nudged its head under her chin pressing close, and she felt tears prick at her eyes, though she did not know why. Maybe it was joy or disbelief or something older than words. She raised one slow hand and let her fingers brush the cub's fur, the texture warm and alive and real. The sun rose higher, spilling gold across the grass. The cubs and the woman bathed in its light, their shadows stretching long and thin across the ground, the world around them waking slowly. But here beneath the thorn tree, time seemed to pause, the line between wild and human blurred again until it vanished completely. And for that brief, fragile morning, there was only connection, unspoken and infinite, beneath the rising sun. The sun climbed higher above the horizon, spilling warmth across the plains, the world glowing with light and life. The woman sat beneath the thorn tree, her back straight now, her eyes open and calm, her heart still heavy with the rhythm of sleep and dream. The cubs surrounded her, their fur bright in the morning glow. The smallest still nestled against her shoulder, its head resting lightly as if it belonged there. The other two stretched and yawned, their small teeth flashing in the light, their tails sweeping across the dirt. The air smelled of dust and warmth, and something that felt almost like peace. She watched them quietly, her hands resting on her knees, her fingers trembling slightly from fatigue. She could see how much they had grown, their muscles lean, their movements strong. The wild was in them, in their eyes, their breath, their restless shifting. She knew that this moment was a pause, not a permanence, that soon the plains would call and they would answer. But for now she'll let herself breathe with them, watching the morning settle between them like a fragile thread. The smallest cub stirred, pressing its head more firmly into her shoulder, its fur tickling her neck. She smiled faintly, her eyes soft. She wanted to stay like this forever, yet she knew forever did not belong to the wild. The wind moved through the grass, carrying distant sounds, the cry of birds, the low rumble of something moving far away, the world reminding her that it never stopped. Not for her, not for them. She reached up slowly, her hand brushing the smallest cub's back, tracing the curve of its spine. The cub shifted its weight, its body warm and trusting against her. She whispered a quiet sound, something like a thank you, though she knew the cub would not understand. The oldest cub lifted its head and looked toward the horizon, its ears twitching, its body tense with instinct. The second followed, glancing between the open plains and the woman, a decision forming in their small, wild minds. They moved closer to the edge of the clearing, pausing as if waiting for a sign. The woman watched them, her chest tight with both pride and sorrow. She nodded once, her throat too full for words. She wanted them to go, she needed them to live. The smallest cub lifted its head at last, its eyes meeting hers. A long moment passed between them, unbroken by sound, the air thick with meaning. It blinked once, then stepped lightly from her shoulder onto the ground. It turned back to look at her one last time, then began to follow the others, the grass closing behind them, their golden fur melting into the light. She watched until there was nothing left but the soft sway of grass and the whisper of wind. She sat there for a long time, her body still, her mind full of the silence they left behind. She could feel the warmth of their touch still lingering on her skin. She looked up at the sky, its color deep and endless, and smiled, though her eyes burned. She had seen something pure, something that lived beyond words, and belonged to the spaces where fear could not reach. She rose slowly, her legs unsteady, brushing the dust from her clothes. She took one last look at the plains, then turned and began to walk, her shadow stretching long before her. Behind her, the wind carried a sound, faint and distant, like a soft cry, or maybe a call. She stopped only once, listing her lips, curling into a quiet smile before she kept walking, her steps slow but sure, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The savannah alive around her, the memory of golden fur and soft warmth pressed forever into her shoulder, like sunlight that never fades.